Welcome to the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast, where we hope to inspire you to embrace your God-given gifts, skills, and passions in order to lead with confidence. I'm your host, Esther Littlefield, a pastor's wife, business owner, mom, and writer. My co-host is Holly Kane, and together we chat about important issues that Christian women leaders face. In addition, we interview other women just like you who lead in various roles, from church to community to business. Through this podcast, we offer you encouragement, tools, and resources to help you on your leadership journey. We're so glad you're here with us. Hey friend, I'm Esther, and you're listening to episode 41 of the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast. You can find the show notes for this episode by clicking on the description in your podcast app, or by going to estherlittlefield.com/episode 41. Today, I'm talking with Christa Hutchins, founder of Do a New Thing, where she offers ministry coaching, project, and administrative services. In this conversation, Christa shares about her leadership journey, which includes serving as a volunteer and leading a large volunteer team at Proverbs 31 Ministries. She shares tips on how to work with volunteers, the value of understanding your strengths, and the importance of Christian women supporting one another instead of focusing on competition. And I can tell you that Christa truly lives this out. I've seen her promoting other women, and she's been a huge cheerleader for this podcast as well. Take a listen now to my conversation with Christa Hutchins. Welcome to this episode of the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast. Today, I am so excited to be joined by Christa Hutchins. Welcome, Christa, to the podcast.
Thank you. I am so glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me on.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat with you and hear more about your journey as a leader. And Christa, you and I have met kind of online.
Yeah.
It's been fun to connect that way, but I always love to get a chance to talk face-to-face as much as we can through the computer and hear more about your story. So can you just start by telling us a little bit more about yourself and your background, kind of where you live, what you do right now?
Sure. I live in Louisiana, and I'm married, and I have two grown children, and a son-in-law and a precious little grandson. So I'm an empty nester, which is a big part of my story, actually.
Yeah.
And I am a chemical engineer by degree, and I work in the engineering and construction management industry. And then I also do a lot of volunteer work and have my own side business. So yeah, that's my basic story.
Okay, awesome. And we'll hear more details as we go along, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Great. All right. So since we love to talk about leadership on this podcast,
Right.
I'd love to hear about your leadership journey. How did you end up where you are now? And just give us some background on your journey.
Yeah. So I've heard a lot of people on your podcast describe themselves as the bossy older sister, and that was definitely me. So yeah, I grew up as the bossy older sister, and did just different things in high school, and I think I ran for student council or something like that. But I think my first big point where I felt like someone else saw me as a leader was in college. Our college student ministry had gone on a mission trip one year to Chicago, and then the next year they wanted to do it again. And so the college minister asked me if I would lead that trip. So I had to do all of the training and planning and everything. And then as it turned out, my husband proposed to me just before the trip. So I didn't get to go on the trip. We decided for me to stay home and plan a wedding instead. So,
Oh, wow.
So it was really kind of cool to see how God used me and taught me even early on that as the leader, I don't have to be the doer. And so he was able to take what I had done then and let other people actually execute it and turn out to be a really successful trip. So that was really my first kind of foray into leadership. And then as I began working in engineering, I got into project management, and I led people at work. I led large teams. It started out, of course, with small teams and progressively bigger international teams in 4 and 5 and 6 different offices all over the world at the same time, and large groups of people. So my leadership at that point was based on the fact that people had to follow me. I was the boss, and it was very authoritative. I was used to, I could say, do this, and lots of people jumped up and did it. And that
Right.
was kind of my view of leadership at the time. And then I found though, I began to see cracks in that. Then at church, I would go and lead, an event or a mission trip, and especially the men would, if I would say go do this, they would just roll their eyes at me and go do something else. So I realized that in the outside of work world, that style of leadership doesn't work, and so especially in the church world. Then, as my kids got out of the house, and I started looking at what what am I going to do now? I had volunteered, of course, at church and in their school events, and I'm like, okay, Lord, where do you want me to go now? And He led me to volunteer with Proverbs 31 Ministries online Bible studies. I had done one Bible study as part of that, and they needed some group leaders, and so I volunteered to be a group leader. And it's really funny because after all of those years of being in a male dominated environment, being around a lot of women scared me. And so it was just really funny that, like, if you had told me 10 years ago I would be involved in ministry to hundreds of thousands of women all over the world, I would have laughed because I would be terrified of that. But
Wow.
God knew something different and saw something different in me than I did. And so as I volunteered there, I just kind of progressively did more and more, and eventually served under Melissa Taylor on the executive team for online Bible studies. So we have about 225 volunteers, and we're leading tens of thousands of women in Bible study in each of our studies. And so I'm just so honored and blessed to be part of that amazing team. And so I do a lot of the behind the scenes type things, some small group registration, screening volunteer applications. I have a team that does that. And so as I worked with them, I learned how to be a servant leader. Of course, they didn't have to do what I said. They
Right.
probably shouldn't do what I said a lot of times. And so I had to learn to be a servant leader. And that was such a huge part of my leadership journey, serving under Melissa and learning about how to put people before projects and just how to serve the Lord by serving others and still be myself and still allow God to use the unique skills and abilities that I had. I found early on, as I worked with that team, of course, I began also talking to a lot of people who were bloggers on our team and very creative types and writers. And I found that some of them didn't have the critical thinking abilities to really get from point A to point B. And so a lot of what I did sometimes was we would say, okay, we want to do this. And my job would be to go figure out how to do that and set up a procedure and a structure to be able to do that. Take those really vague, crazy, audacious ideas that God's girls have and help them put it in a structure that they can actually execute.
Mm.
And then I began to ask, God, are there other girls out there that need this? And so that's where Do a New Thing came from. It came from God just showing me how He had been putting me through all of this project management stuff to take those skills and now be able to help His girls put some structure around their big, crazy ideas. And I just love it. So that's what I do through Do a New Thing. So yeah, that pretty much
Okay.
keeps me busy. A full-time job, a major ministry, and a side business. Good thing I don't have any kids at home, right?
Yeah, I love
So,
so much about what you just shared. And one thing that really stood out to me was that you mentioned one of your first lessons that you learned as a leader was that the leader doesn't have to do
right,
all the things, right?
right,
Sometimes the leader is just doing the planning or doing the preparation or doing the behind the scenes work, which is a lot of what sounds like you've
right,
done. And I think sometimes when we think of a leader, we think of the person that's out in front, the person
right.
that's up front speaking, the person that is doing, wrote the Bible study, the person
Hmm.
that is on the video screen in front of you. And that's not always what a leader is, right?
No, that's like one of the leaders
Right.
in any healthy organization. There's going to be leaders of all types, and so we really encourage all of our volunteers to grow as leaders, even if you're not in a leadership position right now, you just have a job and a task that you do. We want to invest in them as leaders because God will raise them up and use them in different ways. And it all starts with self-leadership. So even if you don't feel like you're leading anyone else, you are leading yourself. And if you can't motivate and organize yourself well enough to do the things you've committed to do, or be productive and efficient in your ministry, then you'll never be able to get anyone else to follow you as a leader. So it all
Yeah.
starts with self-leadership and
Yeah.
not so much the doing.
Yeah, I love that. Okay. So, talk to me about mentors. Have you had any mentors on this leadership journey that you've been on?
Yeah, I mentioned Melissa Taylor, who is the director of online Bible studies in First Five at Proverbs 31. And she is just an amazing leader. But what's been really cool, because I've been working with her for 6 or 7 years now, I'm not really sure, is that I was able to watch her grow as a leader. She will tell you herself, she was not a great leader when she started this, but she became a student of leadership. And that's what I learned from her more than anything else, is that you have to study to be a leader. God may have given you leadership abilities, and he definitely gave her a lot of leadership abilities, but you have to study and learn how to use those to be a really effective leader. So from Melissa, I've so much learned, about putting people over projects, but also still being responsible. I've learned about giving grace because we so desperately need it. And I think what I've learned from her also is about never giving up on anyone, working through conflict. People are valuable enough to invest in when there's conflict. And so I've learned from her, not to give up on people at the first sign of conflict. So she's been an amazing mentor. She has a mentor in Lisa Allen, who is a director at Proverbs. And so it's been just a blessing and an amazing honor to study and learn from both of them over the years.
Wow, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, mentors can make such a difference in our journey, and like you said, we have to keep our minds and our hearts open to learning and not just
Mm-hmm.
think that
Yeah,
we have abilities from God, but we need to continue to learn and be refined in that
right,
of how to use
right,
those
right.
gifts.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep. Okay, so you have done a lot with volunteers. You have been a volunteer yourself, and you
Mhm.
are a volunteer, and you've worked with volunteers. So I'd love for you to share with us a little bit more about what that looks like, what that looked like for you, and if you have any wisdom for anyone who might be working with volunteers in their church or in their business or wherever they might be doing
Yeah.
their work.
Yeah, I think it's my own. I still am a volunteer with Proverbs 31, on the OBS team, and so I think sometimes, especially when you're just at the point in your business or your ministry where you're just starting to bring on volunteers, it's easy sometimes to just find the loudest person, the one who's seems the most excited about what you're doing and is the loudest. And so, and because she's the bossy older sister too, right? And but you're really not necessarily looking for that person. She may be that person, but what is more important than someone who is just loud is someone who's really passionate about what you're doing and who really understands what you are trying to accomplish for God. And so that when you find that person, that is what will motivate them to serve your ministry or your business as a volunteer, is because they are not serving you. They're serving God in their life, and they are serving the purpose that God's called you and them to. And so that's the number one, to me, that's the number one criteria that you look for in a volunteer, is someone who passionately believes in what they don't want to just come alongside you and do tasks. They want to come alongside you and achieve the same mission that you're trying to achieve.
Mm,
And that's one of the most important qualifications of a volunteer.
mm.
I think the other tip is a big thing around establishing expectations for your volunteers. Sometimes you're so excited to have a volunteer, just somebody that you're so overwhelmed. Usually, at the time you start looking for volunteers, you're usually so overwhelmed by all you have to do that you're so excited that someone will just come in and do something, do anything. But you will find that people will come in and just do anything. And you wonder, what in the world were they thinking about doing that? And so it's important as you bring volunteers into your organization to have a really clear understanding of what their role is, what you expect from them, what they need to do what you need them to do for you. Certainly taking into consideration their skills and their abilities and their gifts, and how you can use those gifts to achieve your purpose. A lot of times you also want to look for people that are going to fill your gaps. Again, it's easy to go find someone who's just like me to come alongside me, but if it's the same, just like me, then I still have a gap. So when you're looking for new volunteers, you also want to look for those that are going to fill your gaps and can bring something new and fresh to your ministry and your organization. So those are probably my biggest, look for gap fillers, establish expectations, and then make sure your passion and your vision is really clear so they can buy into it with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so valuable, such valuable tips, because I think sometimes, like you said, we go from the angle of, like you were talking about in the beginning, the authoritative, well, this is what I need done, here, go do it.
Right.
And that doesn't, like you said, that doesn't work in the volunteer space. There's some personality types that will probably just go along and do whatever you say. But a lot of people are not going to be, especially if they don't feel connected to the vision and the mission of the organization. So I love that that's your first recommendation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I would love to hear a little bit more about, a lot of us as leaders, we have a message to share with the world. We feel that God has put something in our heart or in our giftings that we want to be able to bring to the world. So can you tell us what that might be for you, and when, if you have that, when did you develop that for yourself?
I think my main message to leaders and to others is that you don't have to do this alone. It can be a very lonely place as a leader and as a ministry writer, or a lot of the people I work with are writers and creative people. And so they can feel very alone, particularly in the online leadership space. You can feel very alone at home, sitting in your closet doing something. And so one of my messages, and that I really strive to do, is to connect people. And so say, you don't have to do this alone. Here, let me come alongside you. Let me help you find people and show you where you can find your tribe of people to walk with you. Because you will, not only will you hit an emotional wall and a loneliness type wall, you'll also hit the end of your abilities. You'll find the gaps that are in what you don't know how to do. And too many people, I think, struggle trying to figure it out on their own, or they just sit and they give up. I've talked to a lot of women who have said, I had this great idea. I had all these things that swirled around in my head, and I knew I wanted to do it, but I just couldn't figure out. I was paralyzed about what to do next. I was afraid of doing the wrong thing, so I did nothing. And that's the place where I feel like my message is, don't get to that place. Let's walk along together. Let's help each other and support each other and help you move forward together.
Yeah. And like you said, it's similar to what you were talking about with the gaps in volunteers. It's the same thing in all of our lives. If we are trying to accomplish a mission or a vision in our own business or in our own ministry, there's gaps. We can't do it all ourselves.
Right.
So I love that you're able to do that and to help women understand that that's actually a good thing, to start off recognizing your need, that you're going to need other people to accomplish this vision that God is giving you.
Yeah. It's important. It's a hard lesson for a lot of women to learn, especially women with leadership tendencies, because we don't want anyone to think we're weak, or we don't want anyone to think we're not capable if we have to go get help, or we have to. And it's not even so much about getting help. It's just having someone alongside you that you trust, that you are not always in your own head, right? You got other thinking going on there.
Yes. We often need to get out of our own head, for sure.
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay. So, Krista, I would love to hear you share, we've been talking about how God has wired us all differently and how we can use that to our advantage. So, tell me if there's a favorite tool or resource that you have used in your life to help you figure out your own wiring and what that has been for you.
Of course, in the corporate world, I've done all of the Myers-Briggs and DISC and all the letters and numbers. And I think those, I never really related to those very well because, for one, I never liked the person that they described. I would read, "This is who you are." And I'm like, that's like a very ugly side of me. And I don't like that person. And so in the sense that it inspired me to become a better person, I guess it was useful, but it wasn't really very useful to me day to day because I couldn't relate to all those letters and numbers. But a few years ago, I did the Strengths Finder assessment from Clifton Strengths Finders, and I love Strengths Finders. That, to me, number one, it was so much more positive because it helped me understand that things that may be viewed in a negative light, that God can use them as strengths. And when I understand the benefits of those and also the drawbacks of those strengths, then I can be more confident as a leader because I know that I'm operating in my strengths. And so my top 5 strengths are strategic, relator, activator, maximizer, and of course, responsibility.
You gotta have that if you're a project manager.
That's right. Absolutely. And so I think the one that surprised me and maybe some people around me was the relator, because I tend to be a projects person, a numbers person. And I often say I don't have all the fluffy words to be, to really be all touchy feely.
Yeah.
But I think really the key of the relator strength is that you build deep relationships, and I'm not the one that has a wide circle of 100 friends. I've got a very small circle of close friends with very deep relationships. And so I think that as well influences my leadership style, that I'm much better one-on-one than I am in that large group. And so the relator is the one strength that I was most surprised about. But then as I've been able to kind of walk in it and see it, I'm seeing how I have not a lot of fluffy words. I have enough fluffy words for one person at a time.
Yes, that's so good. So have you found that you've ever been frustrated with the way that you're wired or a certain aspect of your personality?
Yeah, I do. I get frustrated when when I know I need to put people over projects, and I just can't force myself to do it. I know I need to not be so head down working so hard. That's the responsibility. I think the responsibility is the one that gives me the most trouble, because on the one hand, I know I need to step back, but that responsibility drives me to step in. And so I sometimes step in where I don't need to step in. It's not mine to step into, right? It belongs to someone else. I need to let them do it unless they invite me in and want to use some of my other strengths to help them. But it's not my responsibility to step into theirs. So that's probably the one I struggle with the most is the responsibility.
Yeah. I can relate to that. I
Oh,
don't
yeah.
think that that's one of my top 5, but I can definitely relate to that. I have more of the projects over people. That's my
Right,
mindset too. And so I have to work on the same thing. And definitely there's times
right,
that I probably overstep my bounds when it comes to something that's supposed to be happening that someone else is supposed to be doing and they're not doing
right.
it. And then I feel like, oh, this has to get done.
Right, right. Yeah,
So,
definitely relate to
yeah.
that. That's a big part of it.
Okay, so in regards to that, we all struggle with certain parts of ourselves at times, but what have you done to be able to embrace the way God has made you? What are some things that have been helpful for you?
I think just recognizing that how my wiring fits with other people. I think that's a really neat thing about some of the teams I've been on is how the personalities are so different, and having to learn to embrace each other's personalities and know how we work together well. I love that God is taking so many women now. We see it everywhere. We see it in what you're doing and what I'm doing and what different ministries are doing, that God is really raising up women to work together. And so the old stereotypes of cat fights and backstabbing, God is wanting to do something so different among his girls, and women are beginning to really embrace that. And so I think as I embrace different parts of my personality, it allows me to embrace other people as well and be part of what God is trying to raise up among his girls rather than being away from it. And
Yeah.
early in my career, our company had a client who was a female, another female. And so they had this brilliant idea that she was difficult and it was hard, that she wasn't getting along with our team. And so they had this brilliant idea that they were going to put me as her counterpart. And I told them that really only has about a 50% chance of success, because if you put two strong-minded women together, they're either going to bond or they're going to catfight.
Yeah.
And so thankfully we bonded. And that was, again, another point in my journey where God showed me how women can bond together and be a formidable force for him when they're working together and not at odds of each other.
Mm, yeah, so true, so true. So, as you know, we really love to encourage women to do what you just said, to embrace their gifts and to be able to
Mm-hmm.
lead with confidence. So, what is one of your gifts or something that you feel like you're really good at?
What I love to do, and I think the one of the really is where I use my gifts the most, is I love to take things that are messy, that don't make sense, and that don't have a structure. They're vaguely formed, and bring some structure to that. That to me is just magic. When that happens, when I can take somebody's idea or my idea, or even something as simple as a dinner recipe or anything that's like fuzzy, and put some structure around it, and then it all lays out into a plan that can be
Mm,
executed. That to me is just, that fuels me when I do that. And so that's my gift. I believe that God is using more than anything else right now, is to help people do that and show them that they can do it too. Just because
mhm.
it's not your strength doesn't mean you can't do it. So it means that you may need to work at learning how to do it a little bit and focus on it. And it may look different when you do it than when I do it, and that's
Mhm.
okay. But yeah, that's my gift that I use
Okay.
the most. I
Yeah.
love to just make those messy things straight. Somebody told me one time that when we started, her brain looked like a bowl of spaghetti noodles and all mixed up. And then when we were finished, it looks like they were back in the package.
That's awesome. So, I'm curious, how did you figure out that that was a gift? Do you know if there was
I
something that triggered you to figure that out?
I saw the benefit of it. I saw the peace that it brought. I think when I only did it for myself, I felt like it was almost compulsive, and I
Mhm.
felt it was too much, I was the Disney planning spreadsheet and cards for everybody in the family. I've been through all that. So when I'm doing it just for myself, it feels compulsive. When I began to see how God used it to help others, and I saw the peace that it brings, that's when I was able to first put it together, that I don't plan and organize and strategize just for the sake of wanting it all organized. I do it because it brings me peace. And so when I've got a plan, and I wake up in the middle of the night and I say, "Oh my gosh, I've got to fill out that grant application tomorrow or next week, and I can't forget to do that." When I know that it's on my plan to do next Thursday, I can put it aside and go back to bed.
Mhm.
It brings peace. And when I began to see that it bring peace to other people, that's when God really spurred me on to continue to do that in a
Mm.
bigger way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's a couple things that happen with us as women. Sometimes I talk to women who don't know what their gifts are.
Right.
And so they're just kind of stuck and they're not doing anything because they don't know. And I think that's the exact opposite of what God wants us to do.
Right.
Because I
Right.
think we discover our gifts in the doing. So
Yes.
you were
Yes.
doing it for yourself and then you started doing this thing for other people. And then that's when you realized it was a gift.
Right.
because you
Right.
saw the benefit for other people.
I don't think
So
we don't often recognize our gifts as gifts because they're just normal to us.
yeah.
I didn't realize that that not everybody thought that way. I didn't realize that not everybody could just sit down and do that. And just like, some of my friends who are fantastic writers who just string together these words that wrap around your heart, I could never do that. I'm not that kind of writer. And so they don't see it as anything special. It's just what they've always done. And
Mm,
so until you start using it and you realize how God can use it to help other people, that's when it becomes a gift. And sometimes
yes.
before that, it's a burden to you. What was a burden to you can be a gift to someone else.
Mm, yeah, love that. Okay, so Christa, I know you are doing a lot, and many of us that are part of this community have multiple passions, and we tend to be doing more than one thing in our life.
Right?
So I would love to hear about your passions. What are some of the things that fill you up?
I love talking to people. I love hearing their stories, and that fills me up to hear what God is doing through them and to hear their passion. That kind of reignites my passion when I get weary, is hearing what God's doing in other things. I'm passionate about, of course, my family, and I love to spend time with my kids and my grandson, especially right now. He's not quite 2, so he's at a fun age. So that's fun. It fills me up. I am an introvert, and so I have to be careful. It fills me up to be with other people for a short time. and, then, and then it starts sucking me out again.
Mhm.
but but I do love to talk, and I love to talk to people and hear what God's doing in them.
Mm,
Yeah.
okay, that's great. That's great.
Yeah.
So, also another thing that happens when we have a lot going on. So, you're working full time, you have your own business, and you're volunteering.
Mhm.
What would you say are some of the ways that you just keep track of everything? Do you have any habits or routines that help you to be effective as a leader?
Yeah, I think one of them that I keep a planner, and I have a paper planner. So I'm a paper planner person, but my calendar is on my phone. So my calendar, all my appointments, I keep on my phone. My planner I use more for recording what I've done and for making plans. And then my phone I use for my calendar. And as part of that, I keep what I call contextual to-do lists. So several to-do lists, not just one that has the milk that I need to pick up at the grocery on the same list as the graphic I need to create for the webinar, right? I have maybe 4 or 5 different to-do lists that are associated with my writing, with my volunteering, with my home, with my business, so that when I sit down to work, whatever place that is I sit down to work at is, before I start, I can look at my to-do list and I can say, these are the top 3 things for me to get done in this next hour. And I can focus on those three things. That's probably the thing that keeps me from following the rabbit trail of something else that pops up, or in the
Mhm.
sidebar or whatever. Right? Is I actually take the 3 or 4 things I want to do in that time period. I write them on a sticky note and I stick it to the edge of my laptop screen so that it's right there in front of me. It's reminding me what I need to do. So I work from my to-do list. I take the things that I need to do and I decide what I'm going to do before I sit down. Because if you wait until you sit down to decide what you're going to do, then you've wasted an hour scrolling through Facebook before you know it. You know, or at least I do. I don't know if that
Oh,
happens to anybody
I've
else,
never
but
done that. Nope, never.
that's what happens to me. So yeah,
Yeah,
I think pre-deciding what you're going to do is probably the one thing that keeps me sane, is not waiting to the last minute.
yeah, yeah. Such wise advice there. I've heard one of my friends who is just an amazing productivity person
Mhm.
said she never opens her laptop without having a plan for what
Right.
she's going to do. So it's basically what
Exactly.
you're saying. You know what
Yeah.
you're going to do before you jump into the work.
Right.
And some of us have a hard time just slowing ourselves down to stop and think about what those things are going to be.
Sometimes it's because we don't have very much time. So we think,
Yeah.
okay, I just want to open and get started.
Yeah,
And so, but I think if just those 5 minutes, just 5 minutes of thinking about what are you going to do, it will pay off in time way
for
over.
sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So What advice would you give to a younger leader, someone just starting out in her ministry or her career?
I think probably two things. One is that nobody expects you to be perfect. And if they do expect you to be perfect, then you're probably in the wrong place. Um, so no, you're going to make mistakes. And the only way you make mistakes is by trying things. And so if you become so perfection bound that you're too afraid to try new things or step out where God's calling you to step out, then you're limiting where you're going to be as a leader and where your ministry or business that you're serving is going to be. So first would be, don't try to be perfect. Recognize your mistakes, own your mistakes, make some mistakes, because making mistakes means that you're growing. And then the other advice I would give is to study to be a leader. Study, find a mentor, a one-on-one mentor, or even, so much available, your podcast and Craig Groeschel, who I know that you love,
Mm-hmm.
and just John Maxwell. There's so many Christian leaders out there right now who are trying to help us all be better leaders. So be a student of leadership and get out of your own abilities and learn what they can teach you.
Yeah. Well, that leads me right to my next question I was going to ask you, because we always wrap things up with leaders or learners.
Right.
I firmly agree with you that we need to
Right.
be learning. So, do you have a favorite method of learning new things, whether it's reading, listening?
Well, I'm mostly a reader, and I've just started listening to podcasts. And I'll share something, a way of learning about leading that we just did on our team, which was really cool that I've not ever done. So we read the book, John Maxwell's book, Discovering the Leader in You. And we were on a leader retreat. We were reading that book. We wanted to read that book, but we knew we didn't have time before to all read it. Melissa had this brilliant idea. What she had us do when she didn't give us the book until we got to the retreat, and we divided up the chapters so that each of us took one chapter. And so over the weekend, we had some free time or whatever. We each read our chapter, and then we came and we presented our chapter to everyone else. So it was a great book where, things didn't so much like one chapter builds on the next chapter. It was they were pretty standalone, but
Yeah.
it was a great way to get all the key learnings in a very personal setting for a whole team. And so that's one of my new favorite ways of learning in a team environment, is to kind of teach us one chapter at a time together. Nobody read the entire book. We all
Yeah.
read just our chapter. And so that was a cool new way for learning to me.
I love that idea, because I
Yeah.
think that I've seen in the church world sometimes, the leader, the pastor, or the leader of the ministry team wants their whole team to read a book. Well, they're
Mm-hmm.
all volunteers. They're all
Right.
working full time, or they're raising kids, or they're doing something, they're oftentimes it can feel like, oh, there's one more thing on my to-do list and I'm
Right.
already helping out. So that idea is fabulous, because
Yeah.
they can you give each person a chapter, and that's not a huge thing, not a huge burden.
Right.
I
And it
just
wasn't
love
like a
that
big long
method.
presentation. It was like
Yeah.
5 minutes. You had 5 minutes to tell the key points and what you learned and how
Yeah.
it applies to us.
Right.
So it was a really, really neat. It was a really great time.
Yeah.
But
And then if you hear something from a certain chapter that you're like, oh, I've got to go read that, right?
yeah,
Then
yeah,
you need to go follow up
yeah,
on that.
yeah, yeah. Oh.
Awesome. Okay, so speaking of that, what have you been learning recently? Is there anything that's been really powerful for you in the past few weeks or month that you might want to share?
I've really been focused on the 12-week, 3 month at a time kind of thing, which I know you and I shared a bit about. I have not read the book, The 12-Week Year.
Yeah.
But that's a kind of a concept that's been floating around in a lot of different circles. And that's, we tend to be long range planners and long range lookers, and that's great to have that view. But I'm really looking at lots of different resources around the 3 month time frame, kind of focusing in on that, on being effective during that 3 months. Michael Hyatt's program as well is kind of built around that.
Yeah.
The whole 3 month, 12-week kind of thing is something really resonating in
Mm.
me right now.
Yeah. I think there's been research that shows that that is basically the longest that your brain can truly
Right.
actually feel like it's a doable goal to get something
Right.
done in that time frame, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's why it works for so many people
Yeah.
because you're not putting it off for 6 months from now. Oh, I have time because it's 6
Right.
months later.
Right.
So,
Yeah. No,
okay.
so I'm really focusing on that right now.
Awesome. Okay. Well, Christa, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the podcast. I would love for you to share where people can connect with you. Where's the best place they can connect with you? And if you have anything that you might want them to know about that you have available, feel free to share that as well.
Okay. Yeah. The best place to find me is at my website, which is doanewthing.com. So you can find me there and on Instagram and on Facebook under those names as well. And so I have a couple of things for your audience that I want to offer them. One of the things that I do in my business is accountability coaching. So we have one phone call a month and we plan out your month and look at what you need to do that month. And then I follow up by email every week for 4 weeks. So I want to give one of your listeners a free month of accountability coaching.
Wow. That's amazing.
So I want to do that. And then I have 2 free downloads. I would love to give them. One is my top 10 productivity tips for go-getter Jesus girls. And the other one is the first 10 things your new volunteer needs to know.
Okay.
So they can go to my website, a special page. It's doanewthing.com/leader. And they can go there. That's just for listeners of your podcast. And they can go there and get those 2 downloads and enter to win the giveaway.
Okay.
So I would love to offer them that.
Wow, that's very generous of you, Christa. And we will have the links for all of that in the show notes. So for those of you who are listening while you are driving or out running, don't try to write that down. Just go to the show notes and I will be giving you the link for that and you'll be able to grab those freebies. So thank you. That's awesome. So thank you again, Christa, for joining us. And we are so grateful for your time and for sharing your tips about working with volunteers and all of your leadership journey. I thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. And I appreciate you being part of my leadership journey. I mean, I've learned a lot from your podcast and from interacting with you online. And so I really appreciate what you're doing for me and other Christian women leaders out there. So thanks.
You're welcome. Thanks for joining us on the Christian Women Leadership Podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation, come and join us in our private Facebook community. We would love to get to know you better so that we can make sure the podcast is providing what you need. Plus, you can share your questions and ideas, and you'll be surrounded by incredible Christian women leaders. To join the group, visit estherlittlefield.com/group. Now, don't forget, your leadership matters, and it's time for you to embrace your gifts and lead with confidence.